Is Warren Buffett preparing for a crash worse than 2008? Well, if you were paying attention to headlines of articles like this one, Warren Buffett is raising cash and missing out on the booming market, or Buffett's $325 billion cash hoard is an early warning signal, or even this one that talks about Buffett selling 67% of his Apple holdings, you might start to believe that yes, in fact, he is preparing for another major financial crisis. But is Warren Buffett's $325 billion cash hoard really enough to indicate that he thinks the market is about to go south? Or is there more to it than that? Maybe it's just good portfolio management. And in this edition of Truth or Scare, we're going to talk about exactly that. What is the real reason that Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on so much cash? And can we really rely on that as an indicator that the market's about to turn? But before we get into all the details, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want the truth, the real truth about personal finance, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. And if you believe that crisis definitely equals opportunity, then this is definitely the place for you. So let's get into it. Let's discuss what is going on with Berkshire Hathaway and why they have found themselves in the position of having so much cash. And this probably isn't what everyone's thinking. It probably isn't them sitting on cash waiting for a major opportunity to buy, although that is going to be the side effect if the market does in fact crash. But it's more about two things. The first is having the opportunity to buy investments that are actually good investments. And the second is about diversification of a portfolio and more specifically, mitigating the risk associated with owning a single stock. So I want to start by showing you the actual cash position. This is the 325 billions of cash and short-term investments. Keep that piece about short-term investments in mind because it's going to be important in a minute. But as you can see, it has spiked quite substantially in the last year. Now, typically what happens with Berkshire Hathaway is the companies that they own produce income, and they typically use that income to buy more investments in either the same companies that they already own or in new companies. And on occasion, like they did in 2022, they go on absolute buying sprees as they find certain investments that are a steal of a deal. In this case, in 2022, it was largely Occidental Petroleum and Chevron and other energy-related companies. And when you look at the current cash hoard that's come as a result, just under half of it can be attributed to the fact that Berkshire Hathaway is still earning pretty significant amounts of income. However, they aren't buying. And we'll get to why in a second. And as you can see, their lack of buying has led to a pretty significant increase in their cash position. But then there's this other event, the big sale of Apple stock. And the question is, why did they sell the Apple stock? Is it because they're worried about a major crash, or is there something else? Well, the truth is there is something else. And that has to do with the amount of exposure that Berkshire Hathaway had to the one single stock that was its biggest holding. And ValueCider has a really good representation of Berkshire Hathaway's holdings going back to 2013. And as you can see, post-sale of 69% of their Apple stock, Apple is still by far their single biggest holding, representing about 26% of all of Berkshire Hathaway's stocks. But the problem actually went back to Q2 of 2023 when Apple was 51% of Berkshire Hathaway's holdings. Now, whether you're Berkshire Hathaway or an individual investor, having a single investment, a single asset class, a single stock that makes up half of your portfolio creates a significant amount of risk. And this is the real reason why Buffett sold so much Apple stock. It wasn't necessarily because they believed that Apple was overvalued or that it wasn't a really good deal. It was simply because they had too much exposure. And that increase in exposure was, quite frankly, because Apple stock has been performing so well. So Berkshire Hathaway unloaded that Apple stock, and that is the second piece of what contributed to this massive cash hoard that Berkshire Hathaway is now sitting on. But this is where we need to go back to our cash and short-term investments graph, because the short-term investments graph is really important here. Because Berkshire Hathaway isn't just holding cash. They know that that's a fool's errand. So what they're actually holding is short-term treasuries. And those short-term treasuries are essentially a really good hedge against the stock market. And this is really no different than what Ray Dalio recommends for individuals, which is having an all-weather portfolio that's diversified for risk, with a pretty significant amount of your portfolio being in short-term and long-term bonds, a small portion being in commodities, and a reasonable portion being in stocks. And this is just basic risk management. It's basic portfolio management. It isn't some scheme or some indication that the stock market is about to fall. It is really just Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett doing what they do really well, which is managing their portfolio. Now, that doesn't mean that the market isn't going to crash. Yes, there's always that risk. But it also doesn't mean that you should be selling all of your investments and getting into a cash position and waiting for the crash that's inevitable, because that may not happen either. Instead, what you should be doing, what you need to be doing, is making sure that you stay invested in the market so you don't lose out on any additional returns, assuming that the market doesn't crash, but also be diversified in such a way that if there is a correction, your position, like Buffett is, to have cash equivalents that can be converted into stocks when they present themselves as a really good deal. And that leads us to kind of our last point here, the point with respect to why Buffett isn't buying any stocks right now. And when you take a look at what's called the Buffett indicator, which is an indicator named after Buffett that looks at the total value of the stock market relative to US GDP, it is indicating that stocks are in fact overvalued. Because typically, when the stock market is valued pretty much equivalent to US GDP, that is a warning sign that it is overvalued. As of right now, the total value of the stock market is almost 1.8 times that of US GDP. And if you look back to right before the dot-com bubble, it was not as high as it is today, nor was it as high as it is today leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. So this overall value of the market indicates that the stock market is probably a little bit frothy, and that maybe, just maybe, there's some room for it to come down. But what's really interesting about all of this is that even though the stock market is valued so high, it doesn't mean that Buffett is sitting on the sidelines. He is, in fact, still buying stocks and increasing certain pieces of his portfolio. Because even though a lot of the stock market seems to be overvalued, there are always deals to be had. And Buffett, like every other time in his history, is still buying the things that he believes to be a really good value. So, Warren Buffett and his cash hoard isn't necessarily an indicator that stocks are about to go on sale and there's going to be a major financial crisis. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be, but what it does indicate to us is that we need to follow Uncle Buffett and realize that our portfolios need to be diversified for risk so that if and when there is an opportunity, we can take advantage of it. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see what always happens right before a financial crisis, make sure you check out this video right here.